You, my listener, could be a smart guy too if you are, like I am, asking the dumb questions. I am the slow man of Chattanooga, and that's how I became the smartest guy in Chattanooga, by asking the dumb questions. The slow man asks the obvious questions that no one else seems to be posing to officials and city attorneys and the like, police chiefs. And like, so right now I've got an inquiry for Chief Fletcher. I have a kind of a partial answer, and also to the deputy city attorney about the authority of Chattanooga Police Department to run unmarked cars on traffic. That seems to be a grievous affront to the public, especially the 50% of the public which is of the female sex. These women should not be stopping for any car that has lights pretending to be police lights inside the dash in a car that looks to be, for all intents, from the front view there through the mirror, a private car. How can a private man pull over a woman driver? Well, there's a problem there, and so we're asking the dumb question of what is your authority? And we hope to have a report probably by next week from Phil Noblet, whom I've asked him to tell me what the authority is, and so he said he would look at it with Wade Hinton, the city attorney, both aware of this question that you, my listener, have the dumb guy, the slow guy, David Tulis, asking that question on your behalf here in Chattanooga as we defend local economy and free markets in Chattanooga and beyond. Our slogan, if we have one, non-trademarked, love your neighbor and buy local. I was yesterday thinking, prescient enough to call the state's librarian in the Secretary of State's office, and he was a very gracious man and quickly sent me a copy of the 1937 Commercial Driver's License Act. And I want to ask my guest today, who is an Indian tribal chief. His name is Kurt Riggen, and he is the chief of the Kikilias. Is that right, Kurt? Am I saying that right?
Kikialis.
I've said it wrong every time. Kikialis Indian Nation, which is on the Washington coast. It's a small tribe, and Kurt is the chief. And he works as a tribal advisor and counsel. He is a counsel for tribes in problems that have legal problems. Members of various tribes who have problems vis-a-vis the Yankee governments, the Yankee states around them, very abusive with their police operations against the poor Indians, who are often just held in the lowest regard. They're worse than, they're worse than Hispanics, worse than blacks to some of these sheriff's deputies in the West. He lives in Denver and is a member of the federal bar, though he's not a member of any state bar because he deals with sovereign nations, which are these tribes. And as we hear about the tribal governments and tribal jurisdictions, we raise the questions, well, what about people in Tennessee? Can they be free too, as travelers are within tribal boundaries? They almost always travel freely without permission from any authority. Well, Kurt, does a listener here in Tennessee, in Chattanooga, does he have a right to travel in a car or truck on the public right of way? Can you make a general statement about that right?
Yeah, everybody has the right to travel by vehicular means on the public roads. And as a matter of fact, if you go onto, if you go into your state statutes, your county and your municipal codes, and you do a word search for travel as a matter of right, you'll find quite a bit out there. There's quite a few statutes and municipal codes and different laws throughout the state that say you have a right to travel on the roads as a matter of right. You have a right to travel by vehicular means as a matter of right. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean you got a right to walk on the roads? No, vehicular means you have a right to, you have a right to travel by driving yourself and by driving your vehicle on your property from point A to point B. It's not a privilege. It is a right.
When you say on your property, what do you mean by that? I don't have a big property big enough to contain a road.
The public roads are, open as a matter of right. And the statutes are pretty clear about that. It doesn't say, they're, open as a matter of privilege. It says they're open as a matter of right.
Well, how is it that Tennessee government has the means to enforce upon the people, and it really is done it legally or maybe illegally, and done it as a matter of culture? Culture has grown to accept the imposition of the state's claims upon upon every individual who travels by car or truck on the people's roads. How has it done that? What mechanism is its strongest tool?
Probably, I mean, in this state here in Colorado, it's done illegally. What they do is they've established these courts, like in my county. The Jefferson County Court is actually owned by the Jefferson County Development Corporation. Now, they own the what they call the Taj Mahal here, which is the big fancy courthouse. The Jefferson County Development Corporation owns the courthouse, the land it sits on, the prosecuting attorney's office, the land it sits on, the sheriff's office, the land it sits on, and the public defender's office, and the land it sits on. Now, my question, I'm actually suing them at this point in time. I'm suing Jefferson County, their prosecutors, their judges, and one of the local municipalities here in Wheat Ridge. And I'm asking them, how does a private corporation get $15 million in bulletproof glass put in their building, paid for by the feds? So how does the feds pay $15 million to put bulletproof glass in a privately owned building? Nobody's got any answers to that. They go, oh, well, this is our, this is a courthouse. I don't give a shit what you call it. You can call it a barn if you want, but if it's owned by a private corporation, the federal government can't put money into it.
Well, what does that mean for the use of the roads? How does the roadway come under state jurisdiction, either by hook or by crook?
That's where it gets iffy. Is it under state jurisdiction? Like, is the Jefferson County Development Corporation are they the ones exercising authority over people, or is it the state or county? And in this state, it's a bunch of private corporations. And so it pays to look into your court system. Is your county court registered with Dun & Bradstreet with a DUNS number? Because they're not supposed to be.
Well, how can
they are?
How can buildings be owned by the public? What would if my listener is a member of the public and he lives in a county that's lawfully constituted? How is that?
The courthouse is owned by the county.
Okay, by Hamilton County, which is a creature.
The county owns the courthouse. They own the sheriff's office. They own the prosecuting attorney's office, but it's the county, not a private corporation. And in a lot of states, they have established these private corporations, which allow them to get away with criminal profiteering, racketeering, organized crime, and money laundering. And they do it as a matter of business. It's a daily activity. What do you mean? It's what we do. It's all. We've been doing this a long time, And when I ask them, "What's your authority to do this?" they just tell me, "Oh, we've been doing this a long time."
Are poor people somehow used as fodder for the justification of these systems continuing to operate? Because I've been reporting here in Hamilton County that we have a judicial industrial complex that feeds upon the poor. The police department,
they can't afford to hire an attorney, and the public defenders, they're not much help.
Why?
Yeah, they're told to do things a certain way, and that's the way they do it. They're not there to provide. Sometimes you get a good public defender that really goes to bat for you, but most of them are about pleading guilty, and they actually get incentives for getting their clients to plead guilty. A lot of your courts, 97% of the people that go through the court systems plead guilty.
In Tennessee, it's 95%.
Oh, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
A lot of places it's 97%, 98%. I think Jefferson County is 97%.
Well, that Kurt Riggen. This is David Tulis. We're talking with Kurt Riggen. He's the chief of the Cupelli Indian. Again, Cupelli Indian Nation, and he is an advisor and legal counsel to Indians and also to travelers, such as people that we've discussed here. There's a case coming up in Middle Tennessee, the Bill Arnold's wife case on Tuesday, where she's being prosecuted for exercising a constitutionally guaranteed right to travel. But so we're asking that question of this man who's worked for 2 decades now in defending people who are exercising constitutionally guaranteed rights, but treated as criminals. Well, getting back to public defenders, how can public defenders and prosecutors here in Hamilton County seem to be playing on the honor of the state? Every time there's a prosecution, there's the idea of the peace and integrity of the state brought into threat by the defendant. If that's true, and so we're going to charge this person with a crime, how is it that you can plea bargain the peace and security of the state of Tennessee in a plea bargain, which just does away with everything and says, okay, well, plead guilty to this one charge and we'll throw away the 5 others stacked against you? How does that work if you have a grand state, which is a kind of quasi-religious corporation, Kurt Riggen?
Well, it works because people don't know any better, basically. People don't know to ask the right questions. And, a proper FOIA request under the Freedom of Information Act, under 5 U.S.C. 552 and 552A, can create quite a bit of havoc for any state, county, or city government.
What does that do?
Questions they can't answer. And boy, there's a lot of them out there. I got one of my students, John Worthington. He's in Washington State, and he was raided by a drug task force that flew over his house with a Navy helicopter with a FLIR. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's forward-looking infrared radar. It allows them to see right through your walls, your ceilings, and they spotted the fact that he had 4 grow lights in his house, and he was growing medical marijuana. Well, in Washington, it's legal, but they didn't seem to care. So they flew over his house with a Navy helicopter. They saw his 4 grow lights. They went and obtained a warrant based on that information, which is federally illegal. Then they raided his house. Well, the guy's had 2 hip replacements, and he has, doctor's recommendation. He has a legal right to possess it in the state of Washington, but that didn't stop him from going in and robbing him, taking a lot of his valuables and destroying his plants. And so I helped him do a FOIA request to the Drug Task Force as to how this all works legally. And they came back and said, sorry, we're a private corporation. We're not subject to public disclosure, so we don't have to answer anything. And that really confused both of us, because we both said, how does a private corporation put jumpsuits, badges, and guns on a bunch of goons and have them raid people's houses, steal their property, and assault them? How does that work for a private corporation? Because we haven't been able to find that anywhere. And they couldn't come up with an answer, except for, well, we've been doing it this way a long time. And I call that the Gary Ridgway theory of law. You ever heard of Gary Ridgway?
No, just briefly tell me, Kurt Riggen, who he is.
Oh, Gary Ridgway is a guy who raped and murdered over 40 or 50 women in Washington. They called him the Green River Killer. And a friend of mine worked at the Kenworth plant, and they would come up there every month. He said the sheriffs would show up to the Kenworth plant every month, and they would question him about another murder. Because they knew he was committing these murders. They couldn't prove it. And finally, after 20 years, a house that he lived in, the back patio, which was all concrete, was starting to disintegrate. So the owner decided he's going to replace it, tear out the concrete, put in a wood patio. And when he tore out the concrete, he found 2 bodies. And so they got Gary Ridgway. Finally, they were able to prove, hey, this is your house. You poured the driveway. How did these 2 bodies get under it? And to avoid the death penalty, I believe he pled guilty. But he claimed that, hey, I've been committing rape and murder for 20 years and getting away with it, so therefore it's legal. And they said, sorry, but just because you've been getting away with rape and murder for 20 years, it does not make rape and murder legal now.
So they claim that answer, Kurt Riggen, chief of the Cupelli Indian Nation and tribal advisor, they claim that authority for themselves, but they won't let a private actor, a private criminal, use that as an explanation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've been doing this a long time. It's like, it doesn't make it legal. You committing felony crimes for a long time really doesn't make them legal at all. And, that oftentimes is their argument. And that's the only one they can come up with, because it's hard to come up with a reason why you're doing things criminally, why you're doing things illegally, and have been doing it for that way for years. And it doesn't, it's hard to cover up that kind of stuff. And that's questions that you can ask them. How does this work? By what statutory authority, do you do the things you're doing? And what probable cause did you have to pull me over? I mean, that's a big one. A lot of people don't realize that, probable cause is a big thing. And they can't just pull it out of the air like they constantly do. So, when they say, well, I pulled you over because you were swerving back there, or you didn't signal or whatever, a lot of times they'll pull you for a couple miles and make you nervous and try to, come up with an excuse to pull you over. And that's usually how it works. And what I tend to do is I don't let them pull their, I'll pull over sometimes before they turn their lights on, and I'll go over and talk to them and say, is there a problem? And that freaks them out. They don't like that generally. Oh, I didn't pull you over. Well, I saw you following me for the last 2 miles. I just didn't want to wait for you to hit your lights to pull me over, so I thought I'd pull over and ask what the problem was. And they don't like it when people aren't afraid of them. They really don't. They like it when you are afraid of them. And I try not to be afraid of my own public servants.
And that's because you ask the right questions. You ask the questions about probable cause, which is essential and crucial. A public official, Kurt Riggen, without probable cause is impotent and helpless to speak to you, to stop you, to ask you questions, to interrogate you. He really has no legal authority to do that. And if you ask him what's your authority, he'd better have a probable cause to.
And don't forget to ask for their delegation of authority, which is not their badge; it's their ID. And I've sent probably at least a half a dozen officers back to their station, because I informed them, excuse me, but until you have a delegation of authority, you don't have the authority to pull over anybody. And your badge is strictly a symbol. So unless you have that ID, you're not a police officer. Period.
And you're acting in personal capacity.
What's that?
And you're pretending to be an officer, but you're really acting in your personal capacity as a man or woman.
Yeah, exactly. You're an officer.
As an individual.
An officer de facto.
Right, but not de jure. You're not legally an officer, but
you're an
officer.
De jure means officer of the day, basically. And officer de facto means that you don't have the authority, that you just happen to be there. And another thing is, I have yet to find any statutory authority for you to be pulled over by an unmarked vehicle.
Say something more about that, please. We have a couple minutes. We'll talk about that.
So when I get somebody trying to pull me over in an unmarked car, I do the O.J. Simpson, which is I go the speed limit, and I do not pull over for them for any reason. And I wait till a marked vehicle gets behind me, and then I pull over immediately. Immediately. And they get all kinds of mad, and I say, you show me the statutory authority that allows an unmarked vehicle to pull me over, and I'll happily pull over. But I've yet to find that statute.
Well, we don't have one in Tennessee, Kurt Riggen. Why does there have to be an explicit statute allowing it?
Well, because, the statutes allow for a clearly marked vehicle to pull you over. It does not say anything about an unmarked vehicle in the statutes. And, that's how women get raped.
Exactly.
Robbed and assaulted. Because they pull over for a guy they think is a police officer because he's got flashing lights on his dash. And, suddenly they become victims. So what I tell people is, if somebody who's in an unmarked vehicle attempts to pull you over, do not stop. Do not pull over. What you do is you proceed to a safe place like a parking lot in a business where there are witnesses. Then you can pull over. Or you wait till a marked vehicle gets behind you, and then you pull over. But I will never pull over for an unmarked vehicle. And I tell them, show me the statute that requires me to pull over for an unmarked vehicle, and I'll gladly do it. But I haven't found it yet. I don't think you can produce it because it doesn't exist.
Well, I've just started searching the Tennessee statute, Kurt Riggen, to find out whether my listener or his wife are bound to pull over before Tennessee Chattanooga Highway, Chattanooga Police Department. Kurt Riggen, thank you very much for joining us here on Nooga Radio. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
This is David Tulis. We're talking with Kurt Riggen, who is the chief of the Cupelli Indian Nation. He is also Cupelli Indian Nation. I'm not saying it right. Cupelli, there it is. Cupelli Indian Nation, and he's been talking to us from Denver and talking about the right of travel that you have and warning about pulling over for unmarked cars. This is David Tulis. I do thank you. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader, Nooga Radio.